Hello, let me do a quick check-in with the first almost four chapters of Indian in the Cabinet, Speaking Truth to Power by Jody Wilson-Raybould, a political memoir by the former Justice Minister and Attorney General of Canada, who was the first Indigenous, a female Indigenous woman to actually hold this position. She was brought into brought into the Liberal Party, kind of recruited by the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau himself, to go into the party, and it all ended really badly because as she is charged, and I think it's been basically independently verified, pressure was brought to bear on her to try and take over the SNC Lavalin case to get a deferred criminal case against the very powerful Quebec company, which employed a lot of people in Quebec, and if they'd actually been convicted, uh, were convicted, it would have meant a lot of lost jobs. And this is something that the Liberal Party, that Justin Trudeau did not want to happen, because they're trying to get all the votes and stuff like that. And Wilson, Jody Wilson Rabeau, I'm just gonna say Wilson, refused to bow under this pressure, and indeed, this came out and was one of the many scandals of the liberal government. And she ended up getting booted from cabinet, and getting booted from the party, and ended up being like an independent member, and then just decided not to run again. And she released her memoir just as we were going into the most recent election, as a little bit of a reminder about Justin Trudeau and the way he operates. I am probably very biased about Justin Trudeau. I'm also I'm really woefully out of my depth in this thing. It's one of these things I try and remind myself as I'm listening to her narrate this on audiobook, her own book on audiobook, that while she makes a case for herself as she is someone who was not a member of the Liberal Party before she was recruited, was someone who came up in as a native politician in Canada, working much not on a kind of a party adversarial basis of like who's going to get elected, who we gotta get those guys out of power, and we're the best, and all that. It was much more of a consensus thing. I also have to kind of remember she is a politician, though it's striking so far about how much this seems to be a real difference in cultures. That this was not, she was coming from the outside into a different system, and a system that had a tendency to look at her as there's A, as a woman, and also B, as a native person, in a very kind of patronizing way. And the book starts off with a prologue where it's the fallout from everything, and Justin Trudeau, how he handles her. She's definitely, it seems like it's very kind of a patronizing, these are the things. I think there's also just a disconnect. It's like Justin Trudeau is obviously a second, even more generation politician, and lived and breathed this as a, you know, his father, Pierre Trudeau, was the Prime Minister of Canada, while he was a child. So he was kind of born in all of this kind of partisan politics thing, and the sense that you would go against the party, that you would do something that was against the interests of the Liberal Party to get reelected, um, seems to be maybe so far alien to them that they don't even see it as particularly something wrong, and they're kind of confused by it. That seems to be my guess of how things kind of went down. As someone who myself is not a politician, I have to kind of catch myself as like, am I being so cynical that when at the beginning she's really kind of, she allows herself to believe in Justin Trudeau and what he's saying about kind of doing different politics, uh, painting the scene of the Harper government that was not a sympathetic government towards Native issues, was very much more on the side of government of extinguishing Native rights versus recognizing them and entering into what Jody Wilson Raybould kind of puts forward as a third a third government in here, which would actually, I think there's the whole thing of like, we're not children. You're not going to you're not we are going to govern ourselves, and we can do that. We want to do that in collaboration with the rest of Canada and make Canada a better place because of it, and perhaps even try and bring some of their more consensus building, less adversarial style of bringing people together as a model that would really benefit Canada, versus just all the kind of the just kind of like, we want to get elected and all the kind of the real bullshit that happens, that I think turns a lot of people off about politics. Um, it's tough. From for me, it's one of these things I need to do my research, because I'm getting it from her point of view. She is extremely well spoken in this book, comes off extremely well, which I guess you would if you're the hero of your own story. But seems to be someone who seems like extremely principled and hardworking, and painting herself who is naive about the thing. And I mean, maybe that is painting herself as naive. She's also got to be in some way a she's come from her own political dynasty, of a class of people who, of leaders in her own community. She talks about how um, she was somewhat raised to be a leader herself. She's had a complicated relationship with her father, who squared off with Pierre Trudeau in with the repatriation of the Constitution, where there wasn't particularly any thought of actually making room for Native peoples in that, and that was what Native people were kind of worried about, exactly where they were going to get left when the Constitution got brought back to Canada. Um, yeah, yeah. So, I know vaguely about these issues, but you also got to be aware that uh, no matter how great she comes off, that you should always take these things with a grain of salt and think about, you know, well, was she that naive, or was she had did she have her own ambitions? She does paint it as a kind of a culture clash, and saying, that just like that Native people don't do their politics that way. Though she actually does mention within her politics that, even in Native politics, she could tell that she was very frustrated because there'd be some Native leaders who would come to the table who hadn't obviously done any of the work, that were simply, their only goal was to win leadership, not to actually exercise and do the work behind that. And that's not to say that's just in the Native community. She also finds that as she goes into the wider breach of ministers who, in Canadian politics, where there's ministers who simply seem to be there to be the figurehead and have somebody who basically does all the thinking for them and tells them what to do, and they just do it. So this isn't simply a thing. That's kind of human nature. Human nature runs throughout all these things. Um, you're kind of struck by the fact that, yes, she had, a father and a great grandmother who were great leaders, and that she's sort of trying to live up to. And you can't help but think of Justin Trudeau on his side, and what's his psychology with his father, and trying to meet his father's legacy. So there's that sort of kind of thing there. There's just personal things, like Justin Trudeau wants to hug everybody, which is, I guess that's his personal style. It's not like she's saying he's creepy or anything, but it's just like, uh, you know, it can be kind of smarmy, I guess, is what it comes across as. And I mean, she does talk about how this was the son's the Pierre Trudeau had Trudeau mania, where people were like really excited about him when he started off, and indeed Justin Trudeau had the same sort of thing on a more kind of what felt like a more influencer, like she says rock star, but I would think almost like influencer, always very aware of his image, stuff like that. But she also seems to be getting, she gives hints to the fact that they talked a good game about, echoing points that Native people wanted to have of an actual recognition of Native government, of Native rights and stuff like that. But then when it comes down to the brass tacks, none of that actually being followed through on. It was simply a platform to get elected, but it wasn't actually how they were going to govern, which is often a kind of a cry of anyone trying to figure out between political parties, is like, yeah, the platforms all say various things, but it seems once they get elected, those platforms get set aside, and then it's business as usual, and nothing gets done. Um, she's a good writer, though. This is well written. It's we're getting into the more nuts and bolts in chapter 4 of what her life as a minister was like, and it's a busy portfolio. She's got rocketed right to the top. Trudeau has put. She notes that Trudeau's hired for the ministers all seem to have people who have actual real experience in the works of life that they're being put as ministers into. Though, as we know, as we go forward, he becomes much like Stephen Harper, and everything's getting controlled out of the PMO's office, the Prime Minister's office, the PMO, out of the PMO, where the ministers don't get to do very much, and he loses a lot of these real life ministers as they go along, perhaps because of that frustration of that they're just there to be supposedly to be figureheads in this situation. Um, yeah. Judy Wilson Robeau, she is of her tribe, her native, her people are on Vancouver Island. She actually grew up a good bit of it in Comox, where I actually lived for a good number of years. So there's some interesting connections there. She was born in 1971, so she's actually, kind of close to my age. She's younger than me, and what the fuck have I done with my life? This is someone who is extremely accomplished, extremely talented, and yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting stuff. I do feel like I know nothing. I know nothing, and I need to probably read some news articles, read some reaction reviews to this book, and see if there's things that people poke holes in, or stuff like that. But it's extremely readable book. You expect with someone who's a politician that it's going to be kind of read either like a I mean it's very smooth, but it seems like genuine smooth. Um, I'll work on that. But yeah, the language is actually seems to be fairly open. This is somebody who is not in office, and I probably isn't expecting to get hired back for the Liberals anytime soon. I think her thing about it is like, well, why am I writing this book? It's like, well, I'm reflecting on what the hell happened with this whole SNC Lavalin thing, but she's also reflecting about, like, is it emblematic of the complications that Canada is dealing with Native people in general, how my experience as a Native woman trying to work within a Canadian government failed, that went so wrong, and that she ended up saying, like, I don't trust you anymore, Mr. Prime Minister. I can't follow you, and I'm going to resign. And indeed she does, because she's just totally lost faith in this guy, which I'm an NDP voter. Whether I'm not a member of the NDP or anything like that. It's just who I've parked my vote with. So I was fairly cynical about the Liberals, the Conservatives, even the NDP to a certain extent, about how much I could particularly trust them. I mean, the thing you have to say about her is she's seems very passionate about wanting to affect change, and that she thought maybe for a second there that there was a chance that she could have actually affected change this way, and she didn't. Or, I mean, there's things that she did do, but there's so much that didn't get done that she thought really could have gotten done if the political actors involved had actually been sincere about what they had been saying. So yeah, yeah, that is the first four chapters, first three chapters and a bit of four so far of Indian in the Cabinet, which is, I guess, a play on Indian in the Cupboard, the movie and um, children's story that not looked upon well by native people, and that's Indian in quotations, which I'll probably have to explain to people. Is yeah, Indian is not a word that we would use for native people in the thing, but there's this thing of there's Indian affairs. That's actually one of the we have Indian affairs in Canada, which is a colonizing organization within the Canadian government there to paternalistically um, take care of native people like they were children, which they are not. And it's the one post she says, "There's no way." Like if you're looking at cabinet posts for me, this is what they're at the beginning. Like, is there any cabinet post you wouldn't want to do because of conflict of interest? She says, "I don't want to do Indian affairs. It's not a conflict of interest. I think that's an immoral organization. That is an immoral thing that I'm interested in dismantling. There's no way and no sense that I want to actually participate in something that has had such a horribly negative effect on my people." Though, ironically enough, becoming the first Minister of Justice and Attorney General, the first person who held that was the first Prime Minister of Canada, John A. Macdonald, who is the architect of Indian affairs and of Canada, and of how Canada did not honor its agreements with and tried to extinguish Native people in Canada for colonizational purposes to be able to get access to all the resources and land and disperse them to colonists because it's colonial empire versus yeah that. So it's like I'm glad I'm reading it. I'm glad I'm reading it. I'm glad I'm listening to it, and I'm actually finding it something I'm going through pretty quickly as I'm listening to it. Yeah, I'm already up to. This is my first check-in, and I'm already up into chapter 4. All right, I will leave it there. More videos later.